Carlos is a community engagement strategist, a civic hacker, helping purpose-driven organizations with data collection, qualitative research, and creating feedback loops for working collaboratively. This means that you're going to do some work today too. So you're going to hear a presentation, but we're going to engage in some work together this afternoon. Carlos leverages 25 years of experience in marketing, design thinking, and entrepreneurship to create civic technology that improves grassroots collaboration. He helps make City of Tulsa a better place to be and all our surrounding communities. Among other things, he has a Bachelor of Arts in Administration Leadership and a Master's of Public Administration, focusing on civic technology, both from the University of Oklahoma. Carlos is a local historian. He's a journalist in Tulsa. He's the author of 2 books. And I'm going to wave to the camera because we have folks online too. So welcome to our online viewers and everywhere members. Carlos is the author of 2 books, The Victory of Greenwood and a kid's book about the Tulsa Race Massacre. So many of you who may have grown up in Tulsa, like I did, the Tulsa Race Massacre was not a part of civics, was not a part of our history. So he's doing good work to bring this really hard history to all of us. In 2014, Carlos was recognized by the National Urban Affairs magazine Next City as part of its Vanguard class. And in 2015, he earned a certification of human-centered design through IDEO and plus Acumen. We know him as a member of All Souls. We know him as a friend and a leader. We know that someone who cares about justice and is doing that deep historical work. So we're better informed. And when you know better, how do we be better together? So for no further ado, Carlos Moreno.
I'll try my best to live up to that amazing introduction. Nicole, you make me sound so important, but I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people. And especially for this presentation, I want to start off by thanking Dee Dee Cox, Julie Skye, Kim Marsh-McLeod, Becky Pearson, and the other members of the Justice League. When we started asking this question, what does justice look like in response to the biggest crime in the city of Tulsa's history? And I sort of turned to the work and the words of House Representative Don Ross, who was taught about the Tulsa Race Massacre in his high school class by W.D. Williams, a history teacher who mentioned the massacre in high school history class at Booker T. Washington. And Don Ross said, "I don't believe you. This is a Black student learning from a Black teacher. I don't believe you. I don't believe that this happened." So Mr. Williams, being the teacher that he was, gave Don Ross the resources and the information to study this issue. And once Don Ross learned what had happened in his community, he began, when he was elected to state representative, he began the work of creating an inquiry by the state of Oklahoma. And the result of that was the 2001 State of Oklahoma race, at the time, race riot report. And what Don Ross points out is, for the past over 100 years, we've sort of been pointing the finger back and forth at each other. The white community pointed the blame on the massacre to the Black community. There were 57 men who were accused of a crime by the city of Tulsa, and those criminal charges were not dropped until the late 90s, shortly after I came to Tulsa. And so one of the things that Don Ross said is that neither white nor Black have fully recovered from the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. And so I kind of wanted to bring a little bit of that history, bring a little bit of that context, talk about one of the founders of this church, Richard Lloyd Jones, and what the founder's role was in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, what he contributed to this event, and what is the context of that. What's the context of that for our church? What is the context of that for our congregation today? And as Nicole mentioned, I think when we learn a little bit more of this history, we might feel a little bit different about our role today. And so I'm going to give some history. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and we'll take it from there. How's that sound? Good, sounds good. All right. And you have my favorite shirt, History Matters. Yes, it does. So thank you. So we're going to get into that. We need to understand Tulsa as a boomtown. The population of Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1900 was 1,300 people. The population of Tulsa 20 years later was 72,000 people. So when we say boomtown, wow, right? That is right. And why did 71,700 people move to Tulsa? Oil. It's because of oil, right? And it's hard for us to think today that these statements about this is the center of oil in the world. That's hard for us to think about today when we think of the Middle East, right? That this was America's most beautiful city, right? We hear that and we think, is it? Our roads are kind of crappy. I don't know about America's most beautiful city. When we hear things like the Magic City and those types of visions of Tulsa for itself, it's really hard for us to envision that today. But oil did really fuel that. A full half of the oil that was used in World War I came directly from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Most of the oil that was used in World War II came from this region, Oklahoma and Texas. So this region fueled 2 world wars. And all that comes with. And what came to Tulsa with it was wealth. Tulsa made a lot of millionaires and billionaires. And when we think of what is the economy of a boom town, and you see this in Bisbee, Arizona with silver mining. You see it in the copper mines in other Western towns and cities. You see it in California with the gold rush, right? Whenever you have a boom town, you have people who accumulate wealth very, very quickly. And with that wealth comes the protection of the wealth. It's the Wild West, and we're extracting these resources out of the ground. We have to protect what we've extracted. And who we need protection from is the unions. Because if workers organize and unionize, then we're not going to have as much profit. Who we need to protect ourselves from are the outsiders. Who we need to protect ourselves from are those people over there who are going to threaten and attack our source of wealth, our prosperity, right? And so anytime you have a boom town, you have this sort of very protective power structure that gets established. We need to protect ourselves. We need to protect ourselves from the Catholics, the immigrants, the Black people, the Native Americans. We need protection, right, in order to preserve this thing that we're trying to extract out of the ground. And so during this time, you see this power structure build. Who are the good old boys? Who are the saviors that are going to come and protect us, right? And so we see these names that start showing up and the leaders that start showing up. In 1917, the Council of Defense is started. We're near Lewis Avenue. It was named by S.R. Lewis, right? Who was appointed by the governor to lead us, to defend us. You see in 1918, the Tulsa Home Guard. Shortly after that, the Knights of Liberty. If you know anything about the Knights of Liberty, you know who they are. They wear white robes. The Law Enforcement Club, right? This notion that if the police can't protect us, we're gonna step up and we're gonna be the protectors, right? The Tulsa Benevolent Association, and again, wearing hoods and robes, I assure you that they were anything but benevolent, especially to people that they didn't like. Again, Black people, Catholics, immigrants, gay people, anyone who was different, anyone who is not us, right? We're going to attack because that is a way to defend ourselves. And this is something that I learned from Ann Patton, who's a longtime church member and also a journalist and also a historian. And in her book, Unmasked, which is about the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana, what she wrote about was that in some ways, the KKK was nothing but a giant grift. Think about it like Amway today. Men that would go door to door and they'd knock on your door and they said, did you know that the Black people, the immigrants, the Catholics, the others, that they're going to take our wealth, that they're going to hurt and corrupt our daughters, that they're going to take from us, and we're not going to let that happen. So will you sign up to be a member of the KKK? And if you're someone in Tulsa, Oklahoma that has no power, you probably also came from somewhere else, right? You're one of the 72,000 people who traveled here from elsewhere. You have no power. You probably work in the oil fields. You probably work for one of these companies that is building oil equipment, right? You have no power. You have no voice. Someone's coming to you and saying you can be somebody. That's pretty attractive, right? If you wanted to be somebody in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you would sign this little card and you'd be a card carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan. Just like Amway, right? Every single thing that you buy or that you have that shows that you're a member of this group is going to have a price tag on it. So that hood, that robe, the little rope that you tie around, the book that's going to show you how to be a good Klansman, the resources, everything's got a price tag on it. And I assure you that a percentage of that price is going to go to the person at the next level up. And then they're going to take their percentages from the next level up, right? It's a giant pyramid scheme. And that's how they made a ton of money. And money in these boom towns equals power, right? So kind of understanding a little bit more about the context of how all that worked, I think really helps us, when we see that so-and-so was a member of the Klan, when we see that so-and-so might have been a leader of the Klan, right? They're a part of this giant pyramid scheme that arises in boom towns, in Tulsa, in Bisbee. I have a giant, big, long lecture that I gave at the the Tulsa History Museum, where I kind of dive deeper into how this all worked and how it played out after Reconstruction and in these sort of boom towns, again in Tulsa, but also in Bisbee, Arizona. And the gunfight at the OK Corral is like all mixed up into this history. And so is the gold rush where I come from, right? I come from somewhere else as well, here to Tulsa, the gold rush in California, all these sort of like structures of power, right? And one of the events that happens that is this sort of like major event in terms of domestic terrorism in Tulsa that not a lot of people talk about or know about is the Tulsa outrage. It was national news in 1917. The international workers of the world were politically, they were in a battle with some of Tulsa's leadership. There was a house that was bombed. Edgar Pugh, who was one of these big oil executives. So they without any evidence, the police puts the blame squarely on the IWW, and members of the IWW are taken out to what is now Owen Park over there off of Edison and tarred and feathered. And it's a horrific event. And it is an example of the sort of like vigilante justice that takes place, that is present in the 1910s in Tulsa leading up into the 1920s. And so in this environment, in this stage that I've set for you all, right, arrives Richard Lloyd Jones from Wisconsin, the son of Jenkins Lloyd Jones, one of the most prominent Unitarian ministers, if not the most prominent. Marlon, would you say he's the most prominent Unitarian minister in the country at the time? So he has a lot to live up to, right? One of the things that I pointed out in my Tulsa History Museum lecture is that all these sort of like Confederate and Klan leaders have like daddy issues, right? How like their fathers were, my father was a general for the Confederacy, so now I have to live up to that legacy, right? My father was this big, huge, important person, so now I have to prove myself and live up to this enormous legacy, right? And I'm not going to psychoanalyze Richard Lloyd Jones, but he does have a lot to live up to, doesn't he, right? And so he kind of chooses the profession of journalist as sort of like, this is my stake in the ground. I know how to write. I know how to research. I'm a good communicator. And so I'm going to use my talents and my platform to be a part of this community that is going to build this magic city, right? That is going to be one of these community leaders and these community members that is going to build this shining city and protect the city, right, from all of its bad elements. One of the events that shapes Lloyd Jones's life is a murder that happens at his cousin's house. His cousin is none other than Frank Lloyd Wright, famous architect. In 1914, in Frank Lloyd Wright's home, Frank Lloyd Wright is traveling for business in Chicago. And while he's gone in his home, one of the workers of the property, a gentleman by the name of Julian Carlton, for reasons unknown, decides to go into the house with an axe, murder Frank Lloyd Wright's mistress, her children, and several of the other employees of the company. Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture business, part of it was run out of his home. And so there were a lot of employees that were also there that day. And so it's this mass axe murder event. When he's done murdering people with an axe, he locks the door behind him and sets the house on fire. So this is a very angry person, right? And he just so happens to be Black. And so there is some speculation. Again, don't want to psychoanalyze Richard Lloyd Jones, but it is speculated amongst historians that could this event, that it was such a traumatic event, that in a way Richard had to sort of like deal with the aftermath of it because his cousin was, away. That, was it dealing with this event that made Richard Lloyd Jones into the racist that he became? Who knows? But we do know it had a profound effect on him. Frank Lloyd Wright came back to town. Richard met him on the train platform. Is like, I need to tell you what happened while you were gone, right? And tells him the whole story. So that was 1914. He comes into a place that also has a lot of violence attached to it. I just talked to you about the Tulsa outrage, which would have happened, a couple of years before he arrives. He arrived in 1919 and had already had some prominence as a journalist and an investigative journalist, and is looking around Tulsa to see like what, how he's going to make his wealth and how he's going to shape his legacy. And he finds in Charles Page, a fellow Wisconsinite, I don't know what you call it, a fellow guy from Wisconsin in Charles Page. Charles Page, if you might know, was also a very, very wealthy oil executive. Of all that oil that I talked to you about that fueled World War I, Charles Page owned about 20 to 25% of it. And so he already by this time had a massive, massive fortune and had this newspaper that he really wasn't doing much with. It was a Tulsa Times Democrat. And so, they strike a deal. Charlie, you've got a paper and you don't want one. I want a paper and I don't have one. So sell me your paper. So that's how business was done, right? Back in 1919. So Richard Lloyd Jones buys the Democrat, turns it into the Tulsa Tribune. And sort of while he does this in 1919, there's a massive fight that's happening. Has anybody seen the movie Chinatown? A few people, Rango, right? Both of these movies are about water. Because Tulsa's a boomtown, right? We established that. Because there were 71,000 people moving here from other places, they need water to drink. And Tulsa's water is terrible. It's full of silt and minerals, and it's brown and it's salty, and it's just not, it's got like creatures living in there. And so it's just, nobody wants to drink this, right? And it's just salty and brackish, and nobody likes to. So they're having to import water. Tulsa's having to bring water into the city by train every single day. And as you can imagine, bottled water, then these are glass bottles. This is like, you can't just like pick up a crate of plastic bottle. Like, this is glass bottles being brought in every single day to the city of Tulsa. This is just not sustainable. The city needs to find a reliable, clean source of good water. And there's two proposals. One proposal is to get the water, pump it into Tulsa from Sand Springs on land that, guess who owns? Charles Page. So Charles Page, already having made a fortune in the oil business, it stands to make an even greater fortune to own the land where every single one of Tulsa's residents is going to get their water from, right? So obviously Charles Page is like, I want that plan to be the plan. On the other side is a plan to build a dam at Spavinaw and get our water from there. Can anybody tell me who wins that fight? Spavinaw, right? That is where we get our water today, right? And so it's this huge battle that plays out in these political cartoons. And I brought these up for Marlon because I know he likes political cartoons so much. And so when you read the papers and you read these articles of these newspaper titans that are fighting each other over, it's got to be this, the water's going to come from here. No, it's going to come from there. And to see these political cartoons is just kind of like fascinating. And so Tulsa ends up adopting the plan from Holloway to build Spavinaw, which is still today where we get our water. And I think it's fascinating that here you have this enormous fight that plays out in the newspapers, but at the end of the day, the two founders who come together to form All Souls are Richard Lloyd Jones and William R. Holloway, right? So these people who couldn't stand each other for years come together and they form a church. So I think that's an interesting story. So he buys the Tulsa Tribune in 1919. All Souls is formed in 1921 in March. And so for the years that Lloyd Jones is here, one of the other things that he writes about, in addition to this water battle, are the seedy and treacherous things that are happening in Greenwood. So he hires a minister So Harold Cook becomes this sort of underground investigator for the Tribune to then report to Lloyd Jones illegal booze. My gosh, scandalous. Prostitution, gambling. Never mind that literally on the other side of the tracks, the railroad tracks are still there. You can see them literally on the other side of the tracks. So like when you're on Greenwood Avenue and you cross the railroad tracks to the other, like when you're at Greenwood and then you maybe go to the ballpark and then maybe you go to McNally's afterwards for a burger and a beer, right? You're crossing the tracks. On that same side of the tracks where McNally's is across the street, it's the building says Red Light Chicken on it. That was a brothel. Like literally on the other side of the tracks, the same stuff is happening, clear as day, out in the open. Everybody knows about it, but like they're not reporting about that. They're not reporting about the news of like what's going on in the white community. They're going to point their fingers about what's going on in the black community, right? And so we start to see this headline: nab dope peddler, arrest these people because they're causing, they're tarnishing our fair city. One of the most scandalous and salacious things that Cook and Richard Lloyd Jones find is there are these music venues where there's dancing happening with white girls and black boys and black girls and white boys, and they're dancing with each other and they're having fun. We can't have that. We cannot have that. And so it's this element where young people don't mind that there are other young people enjoying music and dancing and laughing and having fun downtown. Aren't we still having that battle today of the right of our youth to dance and laugh and have fun downtown? Like, aren't we having that battle with the police today about the curfew, right, downtown? We're still battling that today. And we're still, Spavinaw, there's going to be a data center now at Spavinaw. And so aren't we still fighting all of these battles today? So one of the things that they find that was here we go. I did have the slide. We found whites and Negroes singing and dancing together. Young white girls were dancing while Negroes played the piano. Oh my goodness! But again, when you were publishing 2 years of this journalism saying that it's bad, is it then surprising that columns and columns and columns of this for years and years result in this newspaper headline? Right? When you're disparaging Greenwood for 2 years, writing articles like this, and every week you're saying this bad stuff is happening and we need to stop it. Does this article where Sarah Page and Dick Rowland find themselves in an elevator on Memorial Day weekend during a parade, and he might have accidentally stepped on her foot or accidentally grabbed her arm while the elevator lurched, like, is it any surprise at all whatsoever to anyone that this article would have come out about their encounter in an elevator, right? And then is it any surprise whatsoever that people read this article in the morning and by lunchtime they've gathered in front of the courthouse to demand that something finally be done after 2 years of all of this, of music venues where the boys and the girls are having fun together? Like, we can't have that, that the community says we must do something about this. So they go to the courthouse and they demand the release of Dick Rowland because they want to lynch him. And to their credit, the sheriff says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to release Rowland to your custody. Sarah Page has testified twice to the police that Dick Rowland never did anything wrong, that he didn't do anything to her. We know now, based on family and other oral histories, that they were friends, and possibly even more than friends. Who knows? We won't ever know. But we know they knew each other, and that's absolutely true. And so this article is widely regarded as the sort of event, right, that sparks the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. But so after the massacre, right, Lloyd Jones, like, he's not going to apologize. He's not going to say, well, I'm sorry, that my words have caused people to act the way they did. He joins the chorus of Tulsa leaders who says that this is all the fault of the black folks. They did this to themselves. And the city establishes 3 concentration camps, one at McNulty Field, which is a ballpark that's over by where Home Depot is on 11th right now. So the ballpark, the convention hall, which is not too far, the convention hall then was over by where Circle Cinema is today. So that was spot number 2. And then the Brady Theater, which today is the Tulsa Theater near Cheyenne and Main Street downtown, is the 3rd location. And so in order to be considered a considered to be a good Negro, you would get one of these cards and you would pin that to yourself to say, I'm one of the good ones. And Lloyd Jones is saying, if you don't have this, then we're going to say that you're one of the bad Negroes, right? And so that's how, people would sort of, not be attacked and not be further traumatized, right? And so this is a picture of this concentration camp shortly after the massacre. And what you're looking at is the entrance to Tulsa Theater, Convention Hall, right? And Lloyd Jones, right, promotes this and perpetuates this. And he writes another article saying it must not be again. It referring to Greenwood, right? Must not be again, must not ever exist again. And we know that Lloyd Jones and other people who felt like him, they don't win. Greenwood does rebuild. Greenwood starts rebuilding as early as 1922. By 1924, there's video footage that the Smithsonian mistakenly thought that it was from before the massacre. And it wasn't. It was 1924. Greenwood as a thriving community once again. But this rhetoric, right, of booze, dope, bad Negroes, and guns, right, is the rhetoric that Lloyd Jones perpetuates throughout his tenure at the Tulsa Tribune into the 30s, into the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And so, his newspaper in part, I can imagine that people who subscribe to the Tulsa Tribune must have thought similarly, maybe. And so that's the context and that's the history. And that's what kind of moves us into sort of part two of this discussion, where I kind of want to ask, now that we know this history and now that we know this context, what do we feel about it? How do we feel? What do we do? Right? And so Nicole is going to carry us into this next section, and you've got some handouts in front of you, and we're going to do a little bit of a dialogue.
Thank you, Carlos. This is rather hard history we just heard. So we've invited our senior minister, Reverend Dr. Marlon Lavenhar, to take a moment to center us. He is also a lay historian of the history of this church and this city, and has been very active in the justice work. And so grounding us for this next part where we're going to have a discussion. And just to let you know, we're going to have another Justice Jam in the coming months, part two. So we're going to do some more digging down in the history and talk about also the civil rights movement, All Souls, and Tulsa. But I don't know what he's talking about. Anyway, yeah.
First of all, I mean, what an that is a phenomenal I've seen a lot of presentations about this history. This is a phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much, Carlos. Carlos knows this history, and what I love his book, if you don't have it, The Victory of Greenwood, he's looking at this as a historian saying, everyone knows about the massacre now. That's all we ever talk about. He said there was a community of some of the most amazing people that ever lived in Tulsa who were alive at the time before the massacre happened. He said we rarely ever hear anybody talk about those people and celebrate that community that existed before it was burned down. So he wrote a book. It's a fantastic book, Victory on Greenwood, that tells the story of about 20 different individuals and families who, I still can't figure out why we don't have streets named after these people, Stratford and all these. I mean, these were amazing. Some of the most entrepreneurial and most significant people who've ever lived in this city. So I hope that that's something that someday we'll start seeing their names on some of these streets around our city. But if we do, one person we can thank is Carlos Moreno, because he's done this history and he's shared it. So thank you. The one thing that I was just asked to do as I walked in a little earlier was just to take a moment to kind of let us breathe and center ourselves, because our nervous system gets a little activated when we hear about massacres and this kind of racism and these types of things. So I just want us to kind of take a moment to breathe. One thing that we've learned, I see some of the folks from our intercultural bridge team, some things that we learned over time is doing this work, you go into this very intense emotional stuff, and then you want to have some more like reasoned conversation, but it's hard to do the reasoned conversation when you're so activated emotionally. So to kind of calm yourself down so that you can really think straight. But anyway, I know a lot of organizations, universities, and others are dealing with their past and people in their past and the history of their organization. And what do we do with these people? And how do we deal with this history? And what's the right thing for us to do today? So Carlos is going to lead us in some of those questions. But before he does, I just want to invite you to breathe, get that air down into your belly, because that's where we start breathing kind of tight up in our chest when we're feeling stressed, or we're feeling, the deep emotion or anger, fear even, that comes up when we're talking about these things. So I just invite you let's breathe together. I invite you to breathe in, take a nice deep breath in and out, and take a few breaths at your own pace, but big, deep breaths, just to allow yourself to center and find that place in you that is eternal, profound, important. So as we have this conversation, the better angels of our nature, the best parts of us, come forward so that we can think well and take this next step as a community around, what'd you call it? The greatest crime in the history of Tulsa, an unsolved crime that still exists right here in our city. So thank you, Carlos, and thank you all.
So I didn't include a lot about the massacre itself because, there's documentaries and feature films and 2 HBO series, Lovecraft Country and The Watchmen. And on your handout that you have in front of you, I included a link to this slide deck so that if you want to learn more and go through this in detail, I've got some resources as well that you can learn more. But I really wanted us to focus, on the fact that during the centennial, so this was about 4 years ago, 2021, Greenwood really did speak. Greenwood said, this is what happened to us. This is what happened to our community. We want to communicate this out to the rest of the world. And I think they did a really good job of that. And the city responded. The city had a program during 2021, and since then it's been ongoing, called Beyond Apology, where the city has acknowledged that this crime happened. The city invited the Department of Justice to do an investigation, and that investigation was released late last year, early this year. So Greenwood has spoken, and the city has spoken. And the question that I want to ask is, what is our responsibility? And so in this next part, the question that I want to ask is, Lloyd Jones and S.R. Lewis and Brady and all of those leaders, New Block, you see their names all over the place, New Block and Whiteside and Lewis and Brady and all of these other leaders, right? Charles Page, what's the law school at TU? McFarland. Yeah. So all these leaders had a vision for the city, right? To be this magic city, to be the oil capital of the world. And so I think in a lot of ways, Tulsa's trying to figure out, like, okay, well, we're not the oil capital of the world anymore. What are we? And since I've been here, I got to Tulsa in 1998. Since I've been here, I've watched Tulsa try to define, like, what are we? Who are we? And so I think it is appropriate to think in the context of, well, if Richard Lloyd Jones and William Holloway could have a vision and form a church, then could we not also have a vision and carry this church forward? I think we can. I think we can do that, right? And so what would it look like to choose a path of healing for ourselves, for the community? And a lot of these questions, I've got 3 questions on your handout, and we'll walk through them. And they're kind of loosely based on Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg's book about reparation, about repair, about restorative justice, and kind of like the process that you need to go through, because it is a process. The process that you need to go through to process this and to come out the other side of it, really understanding and acknowledging and taking action and saying, like, this is what we're going to do to repair, right? And it's one thing to say, like, oh, I want this for the city, but I don't, as much of a writer and a historian as I am, I'm not gonna lead the city into that. I don't have the power to do that. Someone's neighborhood or someone's community. And so the discussion that we've had in the Justice League is, what if we start very, very, very small? And what if we say, okay, well, can we talk to each other as a congregation? And can we work on some of this processing of this information and figuring out how we want to repair? Can we do that individually? and in and amongst ourselves, and then in and amongst this congregation? Like, can we get that? Can we like establish that before we start going out into like saying like we want a better city? Right? So I've just included some quotes by Rabbi Ruttenberg for us to kind of reflect a little bit on these questions. The worksheets in front of you, I've left plenty of space to write. You've got some Post-it notes and pens at the table as well. And so these are really just kind of more reflective than anything else. I don't think we need to come up with any grand solutions. It's just lunch on a Sunday, right? Like, you didn't plan on a vision process. But I just kind of wanted us to spend some time reflecting and just for us to think about that a little bit. As much as I talk about Tulsa and as much as I write about Tulsa, I'm not from here. I'm from Santa Clara, California. That's where I grew up. And, you know, I met Jennifer in 1996 and we started talking online, and the rest is history. You know, she convinced me to come and I agreed, and moved here in 98, and we got married in 04, and Grace was born in 07. And we joined this church in 2011, I think, 2010, 2011, sometime in there. So that's my relationship to this place as a relative newcomer to Tulsa when I joined All Souls, and someone just intensely curious. That's all. It's really not much more than that. But what's our relationship to Tulsa, and what's our relationship to All Souls, and how does that make us feel? And what's our relationship with Greenwood? You know, All Souls has a very long history. Did you know that the first integrated service at All Souls was 1957? That's a long time ago. All Souls has a long history in this racial repair and racial healing conversation.